Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we're featuring one of the members of our corporate selection committee, Pfizer. So this webinar today basically will talk about how to develop your IP and startups with corporate strategic alliances. And as everyone knows, this webinar series is about the members of our corporate selection committee for the next University Startups Demo Day. This is where they get to talk about their technology needs, what they do when it comes to partnerships with universities, as well as most likely, Fed labs or researchers. So we hope that you enjoy today's session, and let's just proceed with a little housekeeping. Just so you know, our next demo day is October 16 and 17. So if you're a university or an entrepreneur or a startup that is interested in seeing if your company aligns with the market, the next demo day will feature startup companies to gain presentation slots. So if you're interested in having one of your companies um, present at the demo day, please submit to our website. The deadline, by the way, is July 14th. That's the first deadline. Another highlight that we have for October 16 and 17 is what we call the IP to Startup program. This is similar to the demo day, but instead of submitting startups, we encourage universities to submit their IP or their patents that are licensed to the universities. Basically, they go through the same scoring and selection, and they end up in an IP book where we distribute these IP or patents to them to see which we can develop further into startups. Then the last highlight is what we call the Investor Roadshow. So these are for companies that have been through the University Startups Demo Day process, and we are presenting a select few in front of investors, specifically those that are investing through our American Chinese University Growth Fund. So these are the three main events on October 16 and 17, and we hope that everyone in the audience take a look, go to our website and see if you'd like to submit startups or IP for this event. Just some housekeeping reminders. You can ask questions. We will have Q&A at the end. All you need to do is go to the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen. You can type in your questions and we'll queue them up for later after the presentation. This session is being recorded, so if you have colleagues that you think would be interested in seeing what this webinar is about or what this series is about, all the videos of past webinars or past presentations can be found on our website. Aside from that, you can also watch other videos that we have about NCET2, about what we're doing with startups and with in the innovation ecosystem on our YouTube channel. So we hope you can subscribe and view the videos there. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the first the early deadline of our demo day is on July 14th. We do have a second deadline, but we do encourage people to submit early. That way we have enough time to go through your applications, make sure they're correct, complete, and that they're error free. So we are accepting two types of submissions for July 14th. One is for startups where you receive a presentation slot at the next demo day if you get selected as one of the companies to present. And the second is a call for IP where top scoring IPs will be featured in an IP book where we put all the information for our corporates to look at. Again, we'd like to encourage everyone to submit early. And without further ado, I'd like to present today's speaker. So our speaker today is from Pfizer. He's Dr. Anton Xavier, and he's a senior scientist and biotech scout at the Targeted Therapeutics Discovery. So Anton has been working mostly on oncology, and he also deals with scouting and external R&D innovation. So I'll turn it over now to him so he can start his presentation this afternoon. So Anton, I'll make you presenter now, and you should be able to show your screen.
Okay, thank you, Ria. Can you hear me? Just want to make sure that everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. All right, so just as Ria mentioned, my name is Anton Xavier. I work at Pfizer. I actually have a dual role at Pfizer. One is in internal development, predominantly in oncology, but the other role, which is more relevant to this presentation, is in external science and innovation. So that's what I do in terms of scouting, or what's described as scouting, going out looking for relevant technologies at any stage, even at the earliest stage of talking with principal investigators in a lab, to understand what kind of technologies that they have and whether they are of a strategic fit for our needs. The potential partnerships that we can form with PIs or with early stage companies that have spun out of PI labs. That's something I'll be describing in this session as well. So just to give you an idea of what the scouting role means, so from a scouting perspective, it's very much boots on the ground approaches that our scouts go out to go out and define what are the relevant technologies. We go to conferences, we go to PI labs, we contact PIs, and talk to them that way. But there's also another way of reaching out to the people out there who may be developing new technologies, and that's our outreach programs and collaborating with groups and organizations such as NCET2 to actually define and narrow down potential companies or PIs of interest to us, or opportunities, even if it is a patent. And then we go on to view those patents and understand how early they are and whether they are of relevant fit for our needs. I am on the selection committee, as Ria mentioned, a corporate selection committee to understand what kinds of technologies that NCET brings in from various universities and further potential collaborations. As of late, we have been engaged with NCET2, and we've found some very relevant technologies that they've brought forward, and we are moving forward towards seeing if there's relevant interests within our research units, and potential collaborations would stem from that. So with that, what I want to do is give you an overarching view of Pfizer to start off with before I start to get into a more granular detail of what we're looking for. So this slide up here just gives you the overview of our goals. Essentially, we're developing strategies that will shape the future of R&D and the industry. And we designed this strategy to deliver a steady flow of innovation and differentiation of medicines to patients. Our R&D focus on maximizing R&D investments to deliver high-value medicines to unmet patient needs, and developing new capabilities in science and technologies, and collaborating with a range of external partners that includes yourself and NCET2 via NCET2 to shape a highly networked R&D ecosystem focused on the next generation of therapies. And from that, we are seeing these positive indicators with a robust portfolio grounded in that rigorous decision-making and strong ownership culture. And that's what's kind of exemplified in this slide of what we have in terms of approvals and in terms of what our pipeline looks like to date. So on the bottom of that, you see, or bottom of this slide rather, you see where we stand in the preclinical stages of various assets. We have 96 in total. And on the above part of that slide, the first half of that slide, you're seeing some of our approvals, including Ibrance, a breast cancer drug that targets CDK4 and 6, Xeljanz, a rheumatoid arthritis drug, as a JAK inhibitor, Inlyta, which is targeting advanced cases of renal cell carcinoma, the receptor tyrosine kinase inhibitor. So essentially, we are making those correct strategic choices, which will build a sustainable engine for innovation over the long term, but also we need to ensure that we execute effectively on our short-term, near-term pipeline priorities. And that's where we come in to really define what we can find from external partnering sources, whether that be universities, early stage biotech companies, mid-stage biotech companies, or large-stage biotech companies. One of the efforts that we have with NCET2 is to help us define where these assets would be coming from. One of the questions I get a lot is, what areas of interest are you in? What areas of diseases are you in? What are you actively looking for? And I'm trying to boil that down in this slide and just give you an idea. And I'm going to dwell on this slide a little bit and give you some tasters of what we're actively looking for. So Pfizer's R&D group is split between 6 research units or therapeutic areas. The therapeutic areas, rather, are actually 6 research units headed up by a separate CSO, scientific officer. Each CSO heading up these therapeutic areas will have a team of scientists and business development people behind them to lead early stage projects from preclinical all the way up into IND and approval. From this slide, you can see those 6 therapeutic areas we're in are oncology, vaccines, inflammation and immunity, rare disease, cardiovascular metabolic disease, that's CVMet for short, and neuroscience. As of recently, CVMet and neuroscience have combined to become one unit called the internal medicine unit, but that's not really necessary for this presentation, as the needs remain the same between each research unit. If we start with oncology and the active interests in oncology there, so what I've typed in there is cell cycle targeted drugs and immuno-oncology. Obviously, all pharma companies and biotech companies have an active interest in immuno-oncology, and Pfizer's no exception to that rule. Certainly, we are actively involved in immuno-oncology and particularly in differentiating ourselves from the competitors. But if we were to go into a little more detail in oncology, we're certainly looking in the areas of lung, colorectal, breast, prostate, ovarian, renal, pancreatic cancers. For those indications, we are looking for small and large molecules that can immunomodulate the environment. So if we can target and overcome tumor-induced immune resistance, that's an area of active interest to us. Obviously, just on a high level, novel targets just in the tumor are always going to be of interest to us. We also have a unit within oncology that's involved particularly with nanoparticles. So any targeted nanoparticle technologies and assets would be of interest to us. But it's very important that I stress that with nanoparticles, there's a lot of companies out there with very minimal data. So in order to narrow down interests in that area, we would like to see a more compelling data package. Otherwise, we're just going to be sifting through a lot of very, very, very early stage technologies. But if you feel you have something more advanced, and this is only focused on nanoparticles, if you have something more advanced and fairly unique, we would certainly be interested in viewing that technology. Other areas of interest for us are in the platform space of defining new targets, as well as the microenvironment of the tumor. So if there is a way to only actively engage your therapeutic in a tumor microenvironment, some way to activate the therapeutic only in a tumor microenvironment, that's an area of interest for us as well. So that gives you a very, very brief overview of oncology. Now, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to be pointing you to a brochure which will go into even more detail of what we are looking for in all of these spaces, including some of our partner lines as well. So if you haven't captured any of that information, or you were trying to write it down as fast as you could, You will be seeing that information later on in the presentation when I give you the link to the book, which highlights all of our detailed interests in all of these therapeutic areas. But if we just go on, now we're into vaccines, the next one on the right. Our vaccines unit is split between the prophylactic vaccines. Typically, we have our bacterial vaccines and viral vaccines. We're interested in GBS, RSV, and vaccines, particularly maternal vaccines that could be transmitted to the fetus. Viral, on the viral and CMV vaccines, and novel forms of delivery of those vaccines as well. So again, if you look at that, that could potentially mean nanoparticles as well. So if you have anything in that space that would be of interest to us, then certainly we would like to talk to you. Again, novel immune system enhancers to bolster immune system of older patients, and novel animal models for assessments of vaccine efficacy is another area of interest for us in that space. So as I mentioned, we have a prophylactic area for vaccines and a therapeutic section for vaccines. So the prophylactic takes care of bacterial and viral, and the prophylactic takes care of the cancer vaccines itself. So cancer vaccines are considered therapeutic, and any area there of interest to us, we would like to hear of. This area also will look at oncolytic viruses as well. So if you have anything in that space, certainly it would be of interest. Novel forms of delivery there, if there's any way to circumvent the whole way of delivering tumor oncolytic viruses, which is typically intratumorally. If you have a novel way to deliver, that would be of interest. Moving on rapidly now to inflammation and immunity. So that area of research really focuses in areas such as rheumatoid arthritis, SLE, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, that's NASH, and atopic dermatitis. Those are areas that are of active interest, and we would like to form collaborations, and whether they be early stage or mid stage, that would be of active interest to us. We're also interested in the interaction of the microbiome with the epithelial barrier, particularly epithelial barrier dysfunction brought on by dysfunctions in the microbiome, how that could potentially relate to IBD, if there's any relation to colorectal cancer, that's also of interest. So with the microbiome, even though it's focused in inflammation and immunity, there are other indications for a dysfunctional microbiome, particularly in oncology. And if you have anything in that space that you feel is of relevance to our needs, or you feel that could be of interest to us, we'd certainly like to hear that. Regulatory cells and the induction of tolerance is key for inflammation and immunity. We're trying to reduce the autoimmune response there, so anything in that space is certainly of interest to us. I'm going to move from inflammation and immunity to CD-MET, because if you understood, there are some areas of mutual interest between inflammation and CD-MET. I'll come back to rare disease. So CD-MET is also looking into NASH as well. So they are collaborating with inflammation and immunity, particularly around defining whether one can reduce the levels of fibrosis, liver fibrosis that's initiated by NASH. And also around identifying novel biomarkers, particularly and most importantly, non-invasive biomarkers for NASH. So that's an area of active interest. Other areas of active interest for CD-MET, cardiovascular metabolic disease, include diabetes and improving cardiac performance via metabolic reprogramming, rather, and obesity. So we do have an active area of interest there as well in obesity. It might not be reaching all the way to the top, but certainly if you have something that's very compelling, we would be very interested in hearing what you have to say. Novel therapies to reduce hypoglycemia and hyperinsulinemia is also of interest to us. Moving now to rare disease. So rare disease is certainly one of the areas that we have defined as maybe we would want to take it down a gene therapy route, but it's not only in rare disease. We will actively look for gene therapy programs in all the other indications, but certainly rare disease is one of the leading areas where we would like to see some more gene therapy targeted approaches. Some of the areas we're looking for there are hemophilia, sickle cell anemia, beta thalassemia, Friedreich's ataxia, that's FA and ALS, and other certain diseases that are musculoskeletal in nature or neuro in nature, such as Huntington's disease. So that covers rare disease, and I believe now the final one I have to cover is let me see there, it's neuroscience. Now neuroscience, as I mentioned before, is in, sorry, 1 second right here as I get my notes together here. Neuroscience is focused predominantly in two disease states, Parkinson's disease as well as Alzheimer's disease. So that's a very, very laser-like focus on those two disease states. So if you have anything outside of that, it may not necessarily be of strategic alignment to us, but we are certainly actively interested in any kind of novel therapeutics you have or diagnostics you have for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And included in that is modalities to cross the blood-brain barrier. So if we want to get these drugs across the blood-brain barrier, we would need to know if we can do that, and certainly new technologies in that space would be of active interest to us. So now that covers all of our six therapeutic areas. I'm just going to go in and kind of drive that a little bit further. Our core capabilities for where we will engage in strategic partnership include immuno-oncology, precision medicine, early signs of efficacy, drug design, and vaccine design, as well as regulatory and safety expertise. And most importantly, our emerging capabilities and areas that we want to invest in include gene therapy, targeted drug delivery. That can include nanoparticles, but also can include targeted drugs to the cancer microenvironment, to the tumor microenvironment. So if something can only be activated in the tumor microenvironment, that would be of interest to us. Big data, so that in itself is another presentation and probably more than an hour to go through. But just to give you an idea of what we would like to do there is be able to define big data and process big data, whether it's on a larger scale of clinical trial big data or on a more granular scale, such as analyzing patients' tumor samples for mutations. That's certainly an area that we are actively engaged in. And that might bring up a question around digital health. Certainly, we are actively interested and investing in digital health, and we do have a separate presentation for that. So if you are interested in what our strategies are for investing and partnering with early stage companies in digital health, we can certainly speak offline on that. We have a separate set of scouts that lead that effort. But now what I want to do is come over to some of the more relevant areas that may be of interest to anyone who's on the call. And that's how we go about forming our strategic partnerships. So in the middle here, we can have a targeted business development deal. Typically, these are outside of that early stage environment that universities are in. These companies are fairly large and have sizable assets, most probably or possibly in the clinic. So the types of deals we'll go for are option-based deals, licensing deals, and mergers and acquisitions. Recent examples of these are Spark and Bamboo Therapeutics, all within gene therapy. That doesn't necessarily limit it to gene therapy, what we're looking for here, but it could be any kind of deal. On the earlier stage, we have R&D collaborations, straight collaborations with our R&D units. So if you remember from the previous slide, I showed you those 6 therapeutic areas. Those 6 therapeutic areas can directly collaborate with early stage companies or mid-stage companies through some form of a strategic alliance. And one of the examples of this is Selectis. Selectis is a immunotherapy company developing allogeneic CAR T cells for certain cancer indications, and they have actively collaborated with us. They are actively collaborating with us, rather, in our oncology units. But now, most relevant to what your needs are is our innovative collaboration model, which is on the right-hand side. And this is where I'm going to actually dwell a lot of my time on. We have various mechanisms to not only collaborate with early stage companies or PIs, but also fund said companies or PIs toward developing a technology that will be of mutual interest to both of us. We have our CTI model, that's our Center for Therapeutic Innovation, our seed funding, and our R&D Innovate funding vehicles. So we have actually 3 funding vehicles within Pfizer. CTI is not one of them. We have our corporate VC fund, which is not described in this particular presentation, but our corporate venture capital fund is headed up by our business development teams, by Barbara Dalton, and she goes out to invest in companies for an ROI. The benefits of the corporate venture capital arm of Pfizer is that it does not necessarily need to be a technology that requires strategic alignment to our internal needs. So that's where you could potentially get funding from Pfizer for a technology that you feel that's not going to go anywhere within Pfizer. But seed funding and R&D Innovate, R&D Innovate is our R&D larger fund, which works very similar to our corporate VC fund. However, with R&D Innovate and seed funding, the companies or the PIs must be developing a technology that is of strong alignment to our needs. CTI is our Centers for Therapeutic Innovation, and I'm just going to go down one slide here to just give you an idea of what that is. Essentially, it's a collaboration between our hubs. So we have CTI hubs in Boston, 2 in California, in San Diego and in San Francisco, and 1 in New York City, where we have teams of Pfizer scientists working alongside principal investigators from either academic medical centers, foundations, or government agencies to co-develop lead assets and move them quickly into the clinic. That's one way of moving things forward. May not necessarily be one of the ways you may want to move things forward, and maybe it depends on what the mutual interests are between your team at the university versus CTI. But certainly this model has been successful and has brought things into the clinic. So this may be an area of interest for you if you feel that it is. But I'm going to go through and give you an idea of what happens is when you form a company. So you're not a academic PI anymore. It's not that the technology is not necessarily within the lab. It's within an entity such as an LLC or a C Corp, and you want to develop that further. We have different means to support that development process. R&D Innovate is one of them. So R&D Innovate provides early stage companies with both equity and access to resources for research in areas of strategic alignment to our needs. We're flexible in our partnering strategy and can tap into the evolving ecosystem of healthcare innovation to make that impact for patients. We make equity investments in this model, and that's been, as you know, an important part of our business for many years. The investments are intended to leverage Pfizer's capabilities and expertise, and along with its balance sheet, to directly address key areas of interest. We provide access to world-class scientists and expertise in drug discovery capabilities for the partners. And so far, we've actually invested in a few companies to date, approximately in total around 50 million. Just to give you an idea of what these companies are, BioAtla is developing conditionally active biologic monoclonal antibodies that can be activated specifically in the tumor microenvironment. Pfizer has gained exclusive options to develop and commercialize some of those antibodies to certain IO targets. The deal highlights include 10 million in equity investments and a number of rights on some of these antibodies that BioAtla is producing. We do have a board observer seat on that. NextCure is another company that Pfizer helped to form. It's focused on discovering and developing new IO therapeutic targets. It has a target discovery platform, and it's based on the Yale professor Lieping Chen and former Amplimmune CEO Michael Richman's research. So they have a highly experienced management team with world-class science and strong support from the environment. The highlights of that deal include $12 million in equity investments. That was into a $67 million Series A. We do have an SAB and a scientific advisory board seat, as well as a board of directors seat. So all of the investments we're making here require us to have a board of directors or a board observer seat, as well as a scientific advisory board seat. Just one more, just so you understand that I'm not just focusing on oncology here. Cortizyme is developing novel treatments in neurodegenerative diseases, including Alzheimer's, and they have some very unique targets and therapeutic modalities to go about targeting Alzheimer's diseases by treating inhibition of key microbial proteases. Deal highlights there include 4.5 million in investments in a $15 million Series A round. So from this, you're going to kind of gather that these companies are a little later stage, but they're not so much later stage as you would want to believe. I mean, so typically we define companies for R&D Innovate as companies that are of active interest to us, but not necessarily have all the data yet to be brought into Pfizer. And that's when we can make an active decision as to whether we're going to put money towards the company. We don't invest seed money. This is not a seed money as early as seed money stage. This is typically your Series A, 1 to 10 million or 10 to 20 million is how much we're investing in these companies. So certainly bringing in Pfizer money for a company such as this will attract other investors and can form a syndicate around that and allow these companies to grow. So now those are those medium stage companies, but what about those early stage companies? Well, we do have a Pfizer Global Seed Fund. Again, with this, it has to be of strategic interest to our needs before we would invest. Some great examples of our seed fund portfolio include a University of Virginia spinoff called Neoantigenics, and also Circle Pharma. These investments are typically, in terms of investments, they're convertible debt, but more importantly, we provide nurturing of these companies by direct mentoring. So a scientist from Pfizer, a lead scientist, typically a vice president or higher, will be actively engaged in this company and provide 20%, 10 to 20% of their time to mentor them through to the next stage. And certainly, if they pass that next stage, we could invest more in these companies, and we would do that either through our corporate VC units or through R&D Innovate. So we can bring in some money. So there are options outside of NCET2's Chinese American venture capital fund. We do have our own funds to support if needed. So be assured that if you do have something of strategic alignment to our needs, we do have support in place to allow you to grow and move things forward. Anyway, so what I want to do is end that presentation on this slide. What you're seeing here is the brochure of Pfizer's partnering strategy. If I click on that, hopefully this will work. Sometimes it won't. I'm doing this live. Typically, I don't do anything live and on the air, but I'm just going to open up our partnering strategy right here. And you can see from this partnering strategy a more detailed outlook of what we're looking for in all therapeutic areas. Of interest, I'm also going into areas that we are not actively searching for partnering opportunities. So that's very important for you guys to know. And what's also included in this booklet is other areas of interest to us. So these aren't therapeutic areas, but partner lines within Pfizer, such as drug discovery, drug safety rather, and comparative medicine. So you'll be able to understand what is actively being searched for in all of those areas. For example, medicinal sciences. What are the interests in that as well? So I'm just going to close that and come back to this slide here. So, and I'm just going to wrap up right now so I can get ready for questions. Essentially, we have in this team External Science and Innovation, which was formerly known as ERD, External R&D Innovation. We have a scientific team with a dedicated external focus. We have boots on the ground, actively going out to meet with PIs and early stage companies. And we have these outreach programs where we form relationships with NCET2 to allow them to bring companies to us to evaluate too. And that's been incredibly successful for us. But hopefully from this, you've gotten an idea of how we go about partnering and what we have available to support the early stage bio-entrepreneurship ecosystem. And we certainly would like to be your partner. And if you feel that you have relevant technologies to our needs, we would certainly be happy to discuss further. And I'll stop there for now and take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Anton, for that presentation.
Muted. Unmuted.
So let me move over to Q&A now. We do have some questions lined up. But before we go there, I just want to remind everyone, we did get a few questions in about the demo day itself. So I just want to make sure that this information gets out before we go to Q&A. So again, our first deadline or the early deadline for the demo day is July 14th. We do have a second deadline, but as we've mentioned over and over, we do encourage people to submit early. So we are accepting two types of submissions. One is for startups. So if you're a company or a university that has a startup portfolio or even an angel investor, you can submit startups to the demo day. And what we're doing with those companies is, as Anton mentioned, he is part of our selection committee. All the companies that fall within his technical area, he will see. So your companies will be reviewed by Pfizer and the other pharma companies that fall within the technical area. So the idea here is we'll get the top scoring companies and those top scoring companies will receive a presentation slot to pitch in front of the corporations, angels, and VCs that we have attending the October 16 and 17 demo day. The second type of application that we're soliciting is for IP. So if you are a university, a government agency, a researcher that has a patent or IP that you would like the corporates to review in order to find what in order to discover whether or not it's market aligned or if it's relevant to industry, put them in as well. We are accepting applications for both. And again, the first deadline is on July 14th. We have a second deadline in August, but as I mentioned again, we are encouraging everyone to submit early. Okay, so with that, I just want to move now to the first question we have in our Q&A session. We did receive a few, but we'll try to get to them as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Um, we have about 15 minutes probably to do the Q&A, but I'll start with the
Okay.
first one and maybe we can just quickly, go through them and see, how many we get in. Okay, so our first question is, does Pfizer have a program that gives mentoring or funding to startups?
Yeah, so we did address that with the funding aspect. So we do have our seed fund, and we do have our R&D Innovate fund, and we also have our corporate VC fund. There's other ways to fund companies that don't necessarily fall within all of those three. We could go directly to the research unit to fund the company, or through our central deals unit to also fund the company. In terms of mentoring, certainly from R&D, Innovate and Seed Fund, that will include a scientist giving 20% of their time or so to mentor those companies. So during that period of growth, you will get that mentoring you need. Outside of that, just on a general mentoring aspect, we do provide mentoring. It's not organized as a very specific group, but we do have outreach programs where we support bio-entrepreneurship training, and we provide mentoring for early stage companies that way. That doesn't give you any funding, but gives you the scientific and drug development knowledge you would need to move a company forward. We have supported, and we are continuing to support NYC eLab. That's a program in New York City that brings in very, very, very early stage companies, and we have a series of mentors, whether they be directly in science or business development or finance, to allow the bio-entrepreneur to understand how to form a company as well as move their asset through all the various stage gates towards IND. So as a quick answer, that was the long answer, but as a quick answer, yes to both.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, how many startups does Pfizer look at per year, and how many deals are usually done between Pfizer and startups per year?
Yeah, so that depends. I mean, there's no real average. I mean, so we're always actively looking. There is no kind of deadline, and there's no numbers. It's really derived from what our research unit needs are, right? So everything has to feed back into our lead scientists at our research units. When I mentioned those research units in one of the slides. So if there's an area of active interest for us, and we don't necessarily have the capacity to develop it internally, or if we are looking for complementary technologies to what we're developing internally, certainly that's when we'll put a call out to our scouts to look for assets. But there is no real number. To be honest with you, our scouts are seeing thousands of startups. You can't put an exact number. And in terms of deals, obviously the deals are much less than thousands of deals. We do narrow down our search criteria once we start picking up these companies and we start internally discussing what their assets are. The deal, it's not so much about how many deals are made, but how aligned those deals are to our needs. So if you have something that's very, very aligned, you will see that that deal will move faster and be done faster within the appropriate timelines. So I can't really give you a number there, because it would then suggest that Pfizer is looking at this much X amount and making X amount of deals. It's not. It fluctuates.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, I am an angel investor and I'm interested to know if you have a timeline from startup to exit.
That's a good question. So, timeline to startup to exit. We again with as an angel investor, you're going to be investing at the earliest stages, at the riskiest stages of the company. So you may not even have a timeline at all, right? So the company may fail. It may not even reach an exit. But if there is some strategic alignment to a company, and we put angel funding in there, and we have active scientists in there, we can move things toward the next phase of funding pretty rapidly. So we could theoretically do it in a year to the next stage of funding, which would potentially be R&D Innovate or corporate venture capital. If you're looking for exit as in terms of cash flow, in terms of the asset being approved, that's going to take a much longer time. It really depends, and it really depends on our strategic focus at the time. So if we have a very laser-like strategic focus, like for example, if we found a company that can target specifically to the tumor microenvironment, or the therapeutic becomes activated in a tumor microenvironment, it's suitably novel and it shows some efficacious data, we would put angel money into that company. We would then accelerate them faster. We would bring them in potentially to our research unit, and you could probably see an exit pretty quick. But it's not concrete. It's dependent on strategic focus, and assuming that doesn't change over time, and also the technology itself. So yeah, I'm sorry to not give you a very specific timeline. It's very much like a question like the one before. It fluctuates.
All right. I do have another question here about federal labs. Let me pull that up. Does Pfizer
Okay.
work or collaborate with federal labs? So do you look at IP from Fed labs?
Yes, and we have looked at IP from Fed Labs as well. We are actively searching for technologies, and there is no restrictions in terms of what we look for. Certainly, it would have to be, as per usual, it would have to be of strategic alignment to our needs. And if there is, then we can certainly discuss further as to how we would move forward with forming a strategic partnership there. But we don't limit ourselves to certain countries, and we don't limit ourselves to certain institutions either.
All right. I do have a question here. I think it's related to the question previously, but let me know if you want to answer this or be more specific. Approximately how many discovery projects that originated outside Pfizer were reviewed last year across the 6 major therapeutic areas? That's a tough question, I think.
Yes, I don't actually. Discovery projects that originated outside Pfizer were reviewed last year. Okay, so now that's a review question. That's not actually how many were brought in, right? And that is all six major therapeutic areas. So that's a lot. You know, you're talking about a lot. We have scouts. So if you look at our booklet, and you'll be able to understand what we do. We have scouts that are focused predominantly within our 6 therapeutic areas, and then we have generalist scouts as well that look across regions. The generalist scouts will look at academic PIs as well. So we are bringing in um, uh, uh, potential opportunities every day. Quite literally, we're reviewing opportunities every day. So there's countless to mention. If you're looking for how many then go on to form potential partnering deals, I can look that number up for you for last year and get that to you. But you've got to remember that's a number you can actually put in stone and say Pfizer does only this amount of deals or does so many deals. Because that would then again fluctuate depending on our needs from the research units. But certainly, if you want to know how many deals we did last year, I can give you that number offline.
Okay. I think we're wrapping up, so we have time for just one more question, and here it is. How
Oh wow,
dependent is Pfizer on external macromolecular crystallography facilities? Would Pfizer be interested in funding development of a technology, compact, turnkey, laser-driven acceleration that would offer the power and speed of large radiation sources, e.g., Stanford synchrotron radiation light source at a low cost, at a cost low enough to justify in-house purchase? Wow,
Okay, so that's a very specific question.
I know.
I thought they were going on about Brookhaven National Labs there, but then they did mention Stanford synchrotron radiation. So yes, so that would fall potentially within one of the therapeutic areas that I didn't mention that's in the booklet. I can. That's a question that's outside of my expertise of scouting, and I would have to call in a few people on that and give you a more defined answer. Is it possible, Ria, to get the person who asked that question, and I can forward that to the most relevant person?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So I can, yeah, with that and the one before about how many deals are made last year, I can certainly get back to both of you on these questions.
Okay, so that's all the time we have today. So before we wrap up today's presentation, I'd like to thank again Anton for joining us and for going through Pfizer's strategic needs with the audience today, as well as uh, partnering opportunities with Pfizer. And, as he's mentioned several times during his presentation, and, just so I could mention it again, if you are very interested in working with Pfizer and you want to see if your startup or your technology is market aligned, is industry responsive, or at least responds to any of the areas that Anton mentioned earlier, submit to the demo day, and we should be able to process your application in order for it to get to Anton for him to review, as well as the other strategics that we have in the pharma area. So again, the deadline is on July 14th. That is the early deadline or the first deadline, and that's next week. And again, we're looking for startups and IP. So we are doing these broadcasts, once or twice a week. So if you haven't been to our website, or if you haven't seen the other, the upcoming schedule, all you need to do is click on our website and you should be able to see the broadcast schedule here. So our next webinars are next week on Tuesday, July 10th and July 13th. So we have two chemical companies showing up next week and speaking. So on the 10th is BASF, and on the 13th is Eastman Chemical Company. So again, for universities and startups and researchers specifically, if you would like to know what BASF and Eastman Chemical are doing, we suggest you log in or you invite your colleagues to join us. And we will have the videos posted within 24 to 48 hours after the webinar concludes. So you'll receive an email from us informing you that um, that the video is available for you to view or to share with your colleagues. All right. So before we wrap up, I'd like to thank Anton. Anton, do you have closing words for us before we wrap up today?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's any companies out there, early stage companies or university technologies, applied to NSET too, so we can review those.
Okay, thank you very much. So, thanks again for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you found this session useful and the information to help you submit, relevant. And thank you again for joining us and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.